Welcome to This Jungian Life. Three good friends and Jungian analysts, Lisa Marciano, Deborah Stewart, and Joseph Lee, invite you to join them for an intimate and honest conversation that brings a psychological perspective to important issues of the day.
I'm Lisa Marciano, and I'm a Jungian analyst in Philadelphia.
I'm Joseph Lee, and I'm a Jungian analyst in Virginia Beach, Virginia.
I'm Deborah Stewart, a Jungian analyst on Cape Cod.
Today we're going to be talking about bullying from a depth perspective. Bullying is something that ebbs and flows in the collective concerns. There's certain time periods in my own life where I remember bullying as a topic for school children was very, very present. And being born in 1962, I remember being in school and bullying was never addressed. So it moves in and out of collective concern. There's any number of modern takes on it, but the psychoanalytic tradition has a number of important ways of understanding bullying and perhaps even some solutions. So today we're going to take a look at that.
Well, where I started, or at least tried to start, was sort of like, what is the human instinctual and, if you will, archetypal root of bullying? And where I went with that was just aggression.
Mm-hmm.
Bullying is a form of aggression where the intention is to hurt, to cause distress, to do harm. And we need aggression. We come hardwired for it. We need it to assert ourselves. So there's this root, which, like so many things, can be used proactively for growth and development, or reactively and negatively to hurt others, or ourselves, as in self-sabotage. But today we're talking about it's misdirected against others with the intent to hurt.
This September, we are excited to be launching a brand new This Jungian Life Dream School program called Dream Studio. And Dream Studio is a 6-session bi-weekly program devoted to exploring your dreams through artistic expression and Jungian depth psychology. The program will be an add-on to all Dream School memberships. Simply join This Jungian Life Dream School before September 25th to take part. And if you're curious about Dream Studio, or about how dreams and creativity feed one another,
we're offering a live free event on Saturday, September 13th at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, so you can have a taste of how art can be a bridge between your conscious and unconscious world. So this is not about artistic skill. No artistic ability is required. Just an open mind, and by all means, bring some basic art materials. We also are offering the opportunity for attendees to send in some samples of your dream art. They can be analyzed, and you can ask questions about the program in general. And all you have to do is follow the link in the show notes to join the free seminar. Hope to see you there.
So if we stay in a kind of Jungian frame, then every symptom, and if we think of bullying as a symptom, has a telos, that it's trying to accomplish something, perhaps in a way that's dangerous or unnecessarily painful, but it is trying to address something.
Yes.
So Winnicott gives us, I think, a frame, and Winnicott was one of the earlier psychoanalysts.
He was a Brit, Donald Winnicott, and he had been a pediatrician, and he worked with children psychoanalytically. So he has something to say about bullying.
And aggression, that he said that healthy aggression tests the environment and builds trust when the environment survives it. So everyone that's had kids knows that those kids are constantly testing you, and sometimes they're testing the parents by being fierce or enraged or really pushing against the parents substantially. And Winnicott observed that if the parent can be resilient and contain what's happening in the right way, that the child's aggression would be seen as a developmental necessity.
He has a wonderful anecdote about that, that the child, I'm going to say a 3-year-old, is angry and upset and, runs up to mommy and starts hitting her or protesting, stamping his feet and having what is universally termed a meltdown. And mother's task is to survive this. Now, is her life in danger from her 3-year-old kid? No, of course not. But how does she handle the emotionality there? How does she handle this child's rage, aggression, outburst, acting out? I mean, he's only 3. If she gets upset or ignores it or retaliates, the child has learned something about the consequences of power. But if that adult, I'm saying the mother, but it could be a teacher, a neighbor, a babysitter, the father, 100 people, can withstand the emotionality of it and contain that child of, you're upset, you're very angry, you may not hit me. No, that's not allowed. Maybe help that child if he or she is old enough to use some words. Tell me what you're mad about. Oh, I see. You were building a tower and it all fell down. But if it can be worded, if it can be contained, if it can be accepted as the child's and held in a way where it's relatively neutral, the child learns that those emotions are okay. And then after that encounter, what Winnicott says, the child says, I destroyed you. I love you. In other words, that 3-year-old has learned that his rage and aggression is not that dangerous. It can be contained, it can be tamed, and he loves the adult that was able to keep it in a way that he didn't lose total control. We need the adults to help us manage our emotions. And if mom feels injured and how could you do this to me, or gets upset of, please stop that. No, you can't do that. Or ignores it as if it's not happening. The child doesn't learn that lesson, that I will help to keep you safe from your hottest, most out of control parts of yourself. I will help you manage your aggression. It's a huge, huge thing that Winnicott says in such a simple way. And the consequences of not having adults able to do that can be the makings of a bully.
Quite so. So what we're saying is that it's natural to be aggressive. It's natural to experiment with aggression as a toddler or even somewhat later.
Of course it is.
Yeah.
Goes with the territory.
Goes with the territory. And that Winnicott wants to normalize that's not necessarily a problem. And it may feel at times that as a parent, you have to be like supernaturally tolerant in order, to survive the testing that a toddler will give you. And even though that doesn't have to be perfect, in general, there needs to be a field of adequate safety
Yes.
So that the child can then also learn how to regulate their own aggression because they've internalized the patient regulation that the parent is demonstrating. And then the aggression can move from an enactment into play. And that's one of the places where little kids learn how to imagine aggression in a way that is safer. So there's a bunch of action figures and they're having wars with each other, or let's get those sticks and pretend they're swords and we're going to go over here and battle something or other, in the woods. I remember doing that as a kid.
And that's exactly what we want, is to turn it into a symbolic representation of aggression. Our son had a friend of one of my best friends, and they played together a lot. And they were playing something, mostly remember railroad tracks and so on. And one of them said, if you don't do this, I'm going to punch you. And the other one said, well, I'm not going to do it, so I'm going to shoot you. And the next one said, well, if you shoot me, I'm going to throw a grenade. And the person said, well, then I'm going to drop a bomb. And the whole thing was hilarious. I went out to dinner on that story for years. And I think after the bomb was verbally dropped, whichever kid it was couldn't come up with a way to top that one. But it was a wonderful way to enact harmlessly and in play aggression and destruction. And the atmosphere, as I remember it, was not especially intense. They were just playing with the idea of all these weapons and what the possibilities were. So that it's a great way to illustrate this turning it into play.
When I was a kid, this was again in the mid-'60s, we all had plastic weapons. We had fake machine guns. I mean, right now that sounds very scandalous, but it was a thing. And all the boys, we would stage these kind of infantry battles with these plastic, guns. I don't own a gun as an adult, so it didn't necessarily get internalized in an absolute explicit way, but we were playing at battle and no one got hurt. Those guns didn't fire anything. We're making pow-pow sounds, and maybe you're pretending to hit the ground, or paintball is a modern version of that.
Yeah, exactly. We played cops and robbers.
Yeah, it's playing at destruction. So that's a normal developmental process, and even this way of imaginally containing aggression as a game. It's an explicit game, and then maybe you're playing football or soccer or basketball, and then the aggression has to function within the rules, within the boundaries, which is what the parents were teaching. It's okay for you to feel upset, but here are the rules.
At root, a lot of it, I think what we're talking about is how to manage intense emotions of aggression, anger, having a conflict. And when there are rules, like, with cops and robbers or you guys playing out in the woods, it can't really go too far with plastic toys or with structured games. But what about the child who doesn't learn this, who doesn't learn a healthy way to manage emotions and engage in conflict, and becomes either intensely conflict avoidant, but any conflict is really dangerous, which is a possible pathway to being a victim, that no aggression is allowed, you never do that. You don't argue, you don't protest. Or if you've been the so-called victor in your early years, you may be on the path to being the bully.
Well, if we again, lean into Winnicott just for a moment more, that he framed aggression as a demand in the child to be met and survived. And then, as you were saying, if the environment collapses under the early aggression and the parents retaliate or shame and they don't endure and work thoughtfully with it, then what happens is the child develops this impulse to demand control, to force control on the environment because the early testing failed. And for Winnicott, underneath that intense demand to control, which is cruel, is a false self that was constructed to protect the vulnerable core of the toddler. So the toddler slaps mommy's knee. Mommy's overwhelmed and she does something that's kind of psychologically annihilating. And then the child at that, particularly if it's a repeated experience, is deprived of a maturing process. And then they have to create, just as you were saying, a false self, which can look like a lot of things.
Yeah.
But the cruelty coats the false self as a kind of aggressive protector. And then we have the bully.
A carapace.
A carapace.
But I'm going back to what you just said a couple minutes ago, because I think it is really right on, which is the need to be met for that toddler young child, to be met when faced with that child's fury, what feels like hatred, aggression, anger, of I will meet you there. I will meet you there. I am the adult. You are the kid. And we're going to meet. Versus leaving that child on his or her own to try to manage these intense feelings, which lead one way or another in a direction, or can lead in a direction that nobody wants. But first I have to meet you there without retaliating or being terribly wounded or simply pretending it's not happening. Hey, come over here. Let's deal. Come on.
So the parents also need to have done their work on their own aggression, because as always happens, is that as the infant moves through these developmental stages, they conjure those same primal feelings in the parent, which is part of the initiatory process of raising a child.
So we're talking really about learning emotional regulation, how to regulate intense affect of the child is really angry, in distress, upset, all these intense feelings. And if the adult has not learned how to manage those feelings in him or herself, it's going to have consequences. Don't you get angry at me. I'll teach you a thing or two. Versus what Winnicott says of that when the child is met and contained, he can say, I destroyed you, or he tried. And because he was contained, he can then say, I love you. I'm safe. You kept me safe. Nobody dies from meltdowns, anger, fury, rage. And then he, in time, learns how to do that for himself.
Exactly. In that rapprochement moment where the child's a real stinker, the parents deal with it appropriately, and then the child's looking around the corner and sneaking up to put, their head on the lap to make sure everything is okay. And that's the natural cycle. But again, if a child's unconscious, if their instincts are not being engaged by the parent, then that wildness just gets kind of pushed away into a corner, and then it comes back out when they're a little bit older. And it's much harder to teach that containment, let's say, to a 16-year-old kid. than it is to a 4-year-old kid.
So I wonder if what we're saying is, in a way, well, we're saying one thing for sure, that the roots go way, way back to very early stages of development. That's not a big surprise. But I wonder if what we're also saying is that, in a way, if this is a repeated kind of experience, that some kids will become more and more aggressive and act out more and more in the hope of being contained and met and engaged and helped. But the more they're not helped, the more aggressive they become and they turn into bullies, let's say. But that the other pathway here at this hypothetical fork is to become the victim of I can't afford to be angry. I can't afford to be upset. Can't afford to disagree with mom or dad or my nursery school teacher. And they can be set up to become victims. So it's either we become over-aggressive or unable to access our healthy protest and self-defense.
Because having no access to aggression, because it's been so dangerous to show any hint of that in the home, leaves the child and then even the young adult collapsed.
That's a great way to put it.
The collapse could look like dissociation. It could look like even an addiction of some kind. But the collapse creates this magnetic field around the victim that creates a sense that anyone could do anything to me. And I am harmless or incapable of response. And that's a tragic trauma response. Fight, flight, freeze, fawn posture. So that collapsing is a form of, it's a kind of freezing, but it's this demonstration of profound repression of the natural aggression that one needs to be in a culture, whether it's a culture of children or culture of colleagues, that we've disowned or our aggression has been banished. And all kinds of problems happen.
And then we've got the dynamics of the dance. That this is, one child has learned to be submissive, and another child has learned to be aggressive, dominating. And as with polarities, they find each other, that each is the shadow of the other.
Right. So then we're in this realm of splitting. And Melanie Klein, another early genius of the psychoanalytic world.
You're doing a great job of wending us through all these various leaders in the field. Okay, go for it.
So Melanie Klein was one of the early folks, and Fairbairn as well, who were looking at this process of splitting. So the bully evacuates something that is intolerable, that is bad, and projects it into the victim. So the victim is stupid or weak or dirty or carrying some other negative valence. And then they harass or attack in some fashion. They attack the person. And then the victim is forced into playing the role of the bad thing. Now, the victim is also split off from their own aggression.
Right.
So the bully is carrying their aggression, and then the victim is carrying whatever is unacceptable in the bully's psyche, and the two are kind of staring at each other in this magnetic dance, which is tragic. Now, where Klein comes in around the idea of projective identification is when these projections are particularly potent, that they can, in a sense, pass a script underneath the table of consciousness, and there is what some Jungians call the left-hand shake under the table. So the unconscious of the bully is passing a script to the victim that they will bring forward some of these unacceptable qualities. The victim is passing a script under the table to the bully that they will bring forward the disowned aggression, and the two will enter into this drama of theatricalizing, so to speak, the thing that the other does not have conscious access to.
There it is. And where I take this is into the social realm of where bullying takes place is called school. That's where it happens. From grade school through middle school, particularly intensely, and then somewhat in high school, but it tends to sort of start tapering off. And I was talking to people all week, and, some of the folks that I could touch base with said, yeah, but it never happened in college. By the time we got to college, it was over. So something about establishing peer relations, and I mean, this is a whole huge subject in itself of how we deal with our peers and socialize and the various groups and subgroups and all those complicated things. You hit grade school, and we have this dynamic that you just elucidated, and the bully needs to learn to contain emotions and rein in the aggression and develop more empathy. And the victim needs to find some more access to aggression and express and, as the kids all say, stick up for yourself. And what does that take? Grown-ups. It takes teachers, school officials, guidance counselors, whoever all those adults in the school are, to see it and provide the kind of containment that we were just talking about a la Winnicott. It needs to simply be engaged, because that didn't happen for those kids, whoever the ones are caught in this dynamic. It didn't happen sufficiently, probably, early on in the home, in earlier stages of development. So now it has to happen in 3rd grade or 7th grade or whatever the grade is. And I'm not sure to what extent this really does happen in schools in the public forum. And I've heard many a story, not from old folks like us who were in school in the 1920s, but kids who were in school 10 years ago or 20 years ago, where it wasn't handled. And something about bullying makes everybody really nervous. It's not just a thing that we do. It's like, oh gosh, nobody wants to touch it. I don't know that that's true, but I've heard enough stories where, especially if it's, boys are physical. The data supports this all the time. Boys will just, get in there and scrap and wrestle and punch and fight. But girls do it much more socially, much more relationally. The whole mean girl thing, especially in middle school, it's very subtle. And there's some way that it's hard for the adults to engage with this, instead of saying, as we would, I hope, to a 3-year-old, hey, whoa, not settle down, here we are, let's deal with you and what's happening here. Something by the time kids are in the 8th grade seems to prevent school administrators from saying, okay, get over here. Sit your little butts down in my office. What's happening? Talk to me. I'm going to talk to you, but this is going to stop.
And that intervention is bringing consciousness to it.
Right.
I mean, just having the assistant principal, you, my office, right now. I tell you what, your eyes are big as saucers,
Yeah.
your hair is on end, and you are wide awake. Okay.
And I'm also wanting to model that idea that I think a mom of a toddler having a meltdown and, maybe a school official or some other adult in a scout troop or whatever would also have that matter-of-fact attitude of, no, I'm not filled with, the juice of human kindness when I see you kids doing this. So get your butts in my office and just sit them down, and we're gonna deal. But that it's not so alarming. It's not so horrible. It's kids being kids. We need to help you guys deal with this. And we do that for a 3-year-old. We don't let the 3-year-old, rage and punch the walls and punch a parent and so on. We have that. Whoa, hold it. Wait a minute. Enough.
So one thing I want to bring forward is that when we're talking about bullying, we're talking about a caliber of distress and acting out that is shy of criminality.
So far,
but then bullying moves into, oppositional defiance and conduct disorder and criminality and psychopathy. But those things are generally associated with adults who have failed for whatever reason to self-regulate.
But that's such a good point you're making. If you out there, doesn't master the task of self-regulation and does all kinds of bullying, acting out, etc., the trajectory is not good. There are higher rates of alcoholism and court behavior and driving offenses and so on. It's really not good. It's not just that it harms the victim, which it does, but it's not good for personal development. It has real consequences.
So some of the ways that we're talking about bullying right now, and I think the listeners need to note that we're talking about this right now as a developmental process in humans that are young enough to have some neuroplasticity. Once these behaviors become cemented into somebody who's 30 years old, let's say, it's a different game that requires different kinds of interventions, because then we have a more serious problem. But when we're talking about this kind of, victim bully, unconscious dance that's happening, it can sound benign in a way. And that may be true when we're talking about something happening in elementary school and the stakes are containable. When things start happening in the adult world, then we can wind up having legal problems, and then it escalates really beyond bullying. So I just wanted to put that out there. So let's take an additional frame that I think is helpful. Another theorist, a guy named Kohut, talks about bullying as an expression of narcissistic injury. And for him, we have a child who has not been giving empathic mirroring. And for whatever reason, the parents are not available, or they themselves lack that skill to mirror, or any number of interruptions. But when a child is not offered an empathic mirroring, that there are fragmentations that occur inside of the psyche. And for Kohut, the rage of the bully couldn't be dismissed simply as sadism, but as a demand to be seen and confirmed.
Yes. Which is, sort of a corollary back to Winnicott of see me, help me, contain me, engage with me.
If the child has a narcissistic injury, which means that they are not in contact with themselves because the self has not been identified and languaged to the child from the parent, then there is a kind of inverted mirror happens. And by humiliating others, the narcissistically wounded child feels temporarily inflated, grand, powerful. And that creates a very brittle solution to that narcissistic wound. And in order to stay on top of the wound, the bully becomes dependent on this continuous demand, domination, and humiliation of others to keep themselves above this painful void of connection to self.
That's a really, I want to keep going around on this a little bit more because it's hard. It's a little hard to understand, I think, at first pass. So I'll take a slightly different tack. That when the child's aggression, let's say beating up on a sibling or, having tantrums, etc., if the parent cannot meet the child there and understand that anger, rage, the obvious lack of emotional regulation in any child is part of his or her being human, and it's okay. The child has to do something with those feelings of not being met, not being affirmed, that what do I do with this? And there's an injury there that can take the path of escalating the behavior to become more attacking, more of a bully, with, I would imagine, the faint hope underneath that someone will engage with it. But it does create that sense of inflation of, oh, I got away with this. Oh, I can be king of the hill. I can be king of the playground. But underneath, there is a relational connection that has gone missing. And it's a very hollow, as you were saying earlier, it's a false self. It creates a false self versus a place that is understood and where you have been met. But that's a part that's simply unacceptable. If it's a part of you that's unacceptable, people tend to act it out because the business is never finished. It's unfinished business. What will happen if I'm aggressive? Well, if nothing happens, it tends to escalate.
So there is the general experience of being met, as we were saying. And when we're talking about a narcissistic injury, we're talking about being met in a very particular way, where the parent is able to identify what the child is experiencing and to language that back to the child so that they slowly develop a theory of personality. Now, there's some research that suggests that this is something that siblings also teach each other. That sometimes it's more difficult for a child that is alone, a single child, to develop a theory of personality without the constant feedback from siblings. But a narcissistic injury is when the parent's needs are consistently dominating the family relationship. So it doesn't really matter what you want. What matters is that you look or behave a certain way in order to make daddy or mommy feel affirmed or not embarrassed, or you should like playing football because I liked playing football. And of course, everyone must like playing football or whatever it is. So early in life, this idea of empathic recognition is missing. And then the child is criticized, humiliated, abandoned, unseen, and develops a feeling that they are defective in some way. And this isn't just about, being disappointed, which is a normal experience at all time. But this is internalized so that the cohesion of the personality is violated, and the child feels worthless, unseen, and in the worst case, even annihilated. And for Kohut particularly, this is met eventually with narcissistic rage. And it is in proportion to the chronic invalidation. So then this turns into an outer attack. And it is in service to not collapsing under the weight of this invalidation. So there's a hypersensitivity to self-criticism. There are these wild shifts from grandiosity to despair. There's rage and humiliation, a dependency on needing to be admired at all costs. And so coming back to this idea of the rage that's boiling in the invalidated child, and then discovering, maybe by accident, that by humiliating and narcissistically wounding another child, that the bully feels relieved of that feeling of inferiority, of being meaningless or worthless. And that is a very seductive defense, a very seductive fix that leads to, of course, all kinds of other problems.
So that adds another causal sort of hypothesis, but one that has, I think, a lot of reality to it. First, we have an inability, a la Winnicott, to contain and help a child regulate emotion. And what Kohut adds to this, he's a self-psychologist, and he talked a lot about narcissism, is that just a general overall pattern in a child of certain things being rewarded, of this is how you really should be. You use the example of football. You really should want to play football. Here's what a boy is like or what a girl is like. And that the parents have a certain kind of set of expectations. And as the child who needs parental approval, tries to fulfill some of those, what does he or she do with the anger and the rage at not being affirmed for who he or she actually is? So again, to use football as a metaphor, this kid doesn't want to play football. This is a kid that likes to read books or likes to play chess. I'll do battle on the chessboard, not on the field. And that not being affirmed for, yes, that's who you are. So let's sign you up for a chess club and you be you, whoever that you is. There's a subtle but substantial tug to be who we want you to be. And that, understandably enough, can unleash a lot of rage and of the urge to dominate as he or she has been dominated, dominate others. That's how it works.
And so as we're moving through these various lenses to contemplate bullying, I think the listeners are likely to maybe find one idea is more resonant than others in terms of their own experience, which is why it's so useful to toss out different lenses. here's another Freudian lens. Is that Freud, of course, had a theory of instincts. He was particularly interested in instincts compared to any number of other things that go into making a human personality. And in his model, the instincts have to be contained by a kind of internalized moral authority, which he called the superego. And of course, in some measure, that is correct. I mean, when you look at your 3-year-old and they're taking a wooden block and they're clobbering, their sibling who's, a year younger, you run over there and you've got to, tell them that is wrong. And hopefully somewhere inside of them, they register this and they think, yes, hitting the baby with a wood block is bad. Like that needs to happen in some measure so that we help our children socialize to minimize harm, if nothing else. But some systems that we can be raised in are so moralistic, so perfectionistic, so hyper-regulating, so that the I of the parent becomes this kind of frightening scourge. And then the child can internalize a very harsh, fierce monitor. And then the superego, rather than helping the child gently socialize and be successful, the superego becomes an oppressive, fierce warden. And if that's been internalized, then when the child a little bit later sees the errant behavior in another child, they can rise up with that same ferocious, critical, oppressive attitude. And that can be impressive.
Yeah, because that's how it works.
That's how it works.
Whoever is bigger and more powerful gets to hold sway.
So if let's say being proud of an achievement is considered arrogant in the family system, and you better shut up, you're too big for your bridges, it's unseemly or worse to even acknowledge a success, then as the child's a little older and another child feels proud of something, the bully will very likely shame them into silence.
I'm going to one of the authors that we read, and we can recommend to listeners, Edward Edinger. And I don't think any Jungian, and God knows how many other people, have ever gotten through training without reading Ego and Archetype. And he elucidates a really big polarity that can become a split in the psyche between what you've been saying, inflation, of I'm bigger than this, I can do anything, I'm king of the mountain, and alienation, the collapse. I'm in exile. I'm alone. I'm defeated. And there's some great illustrations. One of them was some poor adult guy with a beard sitting alone on a rock. And so it goes. But at an archetypal level, these dynamics play out in all of us, and they're especially visible in the bully-victim dynamic, whether it comes from parental domination and harshness or, any one of the other kinds of early beginnings that we've spoken of. But we all wrestle with this of, I'm great, my team won the game, or, I'm getting an award, and then usually these things are moderated by this little thing out there called reality of like, yes, but now I want you to come in and set the table for dinner. You're back home now.
Before enlightenment, the laundry. After enlightenment, the laundry.
Yeah, there it is. There it absolutely is. And usually we navigate these things along a range that's manageable.
Yes.
So we get all puffed up, I'm just a hot ticket. The teacher picked me to read the whole short story aloud to the whole class. Oh, I didn't get picked at all for the softball team. So we're managing these triumphs and disappointments and these assaults on our little developing ego pretty well, unless things are things are too exaggerated, they're too much, and or they're repeated, and it becomes just a relational dynamic that is over-established. And then we get the bully with, as you said, the false self, that I always think of as like a knight in armor, of that we have our armor, and man, nobody can get to me. But it's heavy. It hinders movement. It's inhibiting. It is. It isolates us. I mean, nobody wants that.
Not deep down. The little one inside of us is really just looking to be loved and embraced and welcomed.
Right. And you can't grow in that armor if you put it on when you're, let's say, 11. It's going to really be pretty stifling as you continue to grow. So what was once protective is going to become terribly inhibiting and antithetical to your growth. And then we have the victim, the alienation side of this archetypal polarity, who feels helpless and alone and abandoned and also unseen. There are two different forms of, in this bully-victim dynamic, two different forms of being unseen.
Yes.
Because how many times I don't know how many stories I've heard of kids relating some awful defeat or problem, and the adults saying, well, you got to learn to stick up for yourself, or you got to learn to fight back. Or it may not even be spoken. It's just a pervasive attitude of, this is part of childhood. Boys will be boys. He's got to learn to take care of himself. Man up.
Right. Which is fine if it works, but if that's not adequate, the parents need to take a deeper interest in trying to help the child figure out how to access what's needed.
Right. Where are the grown-ups? One of a client story that was a horrible trauma was little girl in school, 3rd grade, and there was some kind of a platform for ladders and slippery slides and stuff in the schoolyard, and the kids would go out to the playground for recess, and they would get her up on this platform and surround it so she couldn't go down the ladder or the slippery slide or any of that stuff, and she was sort of cornered up there. And that one of the teachers told her she had to learn to defend herself. And my question is, what are you talking about? There are 6, 7, 8 kids surrounding this platform. This is mission impossible. You can't be expected to take that on. Where were the grown-ups? And for kids, whether it's the toddler still at home or the child in school, the grown-ups have to get involved, especially when, as in this situation, we haven't talked about this yet, when one kid becomes the leader of a little rampaging, bullying pack. And that power and that behavior can be contagious. Come on, you're going to be on my team. We're going to get him or her. We're going to get him.
Right. The safety of shared sadism reduces anxiety and guilt.
I'm just going to say that again. The safety of sadism reduces anxiety and guilt.
Right. The safety of shared sadism reduces anxiety and group, because then we're talking about the group.
We've got mob behavior.
Right.
And I love how you said that. That's exactly it. And there that has been the case throughout human history. It's contagious. The shared sadism, cruelty, fury, rampaging is contagious. Jung talks a lot about mob behavior, and it's incredibly regressive.
Yeah, there is something about getting swept into a kind of primal energy that is exalting and frightening. But for Jung, what was most concerning is that there is a loss of the individual, because Jung's whole psychological thrust is learning, which often happens later in life, because in the beginning we're just trying to get our feet on the ground, figure out who we are. But later on in life, it's like, no, this is me, and that's not me. That those traits, that agenda, those belief systems, that's being shoved inside of me, and I recognize that as alien to my true nature.
It's easily ignited, and you've kind of teed me up to read this. I wasn't sure whether it would fold in or not, but here it is, so I'm going to go for it. It's our friend, mentor, life guide, Carl Jung, talking about this. Ultimately, everything depends on the quality of the individual, but our fatally short-sighted age thinks only in terms of large numbers and mass organizations. Though one would think that the world had seen more than enough of what a well-disciplined mob can do in the hands of a single madman. Unfortunately, this realization does not seem to have penetrated very far, and our blindness is extremely dangerous. People go on blithely organizing and believing in the sovereign remedy of mass action without the least consciousness of the fact that the most powerful organizations can be maintained only by the greatest ruthlessness of their leaders and the cheapest of slogans. Now, I'm calling that basically bullying. So if we take the schoolyard bully and give him or her a pack of followers and turn them into adults, this is why you get mobs and how you get mobs. And it's just what you were saying, the loss of the individual of, wait a minute, this doesn't comport with common sense, doesn't comport with my values. I'm not going to do this. People can get swept up in it.
Absolutely. So what Jung was interested in and is mysterious, that when a group comes together and there is this whipping up of intense feeling and combined with anxiety, that the ego loses some of its consciousness. There's a dipping and it goes down. And then once we lose a certain level of consciousness, we are much more easily manipulated by the mob, the crowd, advertising campaigns for that matter. So, like, for instance, part of advertising is it's not just, buy this product, but it provokes anxiety. Like, if you don't buy this product, there are these terrible outcomes. You won't be pretty, you won't be healthy, you won't be rich or famous. So there has to be a stirring of anxiety, which lowers consciousness, and then the false solution is presented, which in a benign way might be buy this perfume or cologne or buy this beautiful car. In a more savage environment, the solution is to gang up on another person, be sadistic, to demonstrate how superior the group is, how morally righteous, that how powerful we all are, and therefore we don't have to feel guilty or anxious about anything. And that's dangerous.
But I like how we've, sort of extended the perimeter of this into a realm such as advertising. And the question is, is it in a certain sense, is manipulation a certain form or at least tangential to bullying? That if you can be manipulated and you can be coerced into buying something or into not speaking up, of not going against the crowd, or simply maintaining your own individual stance. No, I don't believe in that, so I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to buy it. I'm not going to wear that. It's an interesting thought that this is a subtle form of being manipulated by outside forces, of be this way. It goes back to the kid whose parents, hypothetically, we're using it as a metaphor, say, all our kids, all our boys, all join the football team. And, in a sense, we're all privy to that kind of parental influence, too, of everybody in our family is good at sports. And we do kind of go along, but just what Jung was saying here, ultimately everything depends on the quality of the individual. That's an amazing phrase. And there, I think, is the ultimate antidote to bullying, whether it's taking place in an overt way in a school, let's say, or perhaps as an adult in a really subtle way, pressure to live a certain way and acquire certain consumer items, establish certain values. Of everything ultimately depends on each of us.
Right. So achieving this feeling of being an individual,
Yes,
which is why Jung coined that term, individuation, individuation, so that it starts with an assumption that we have been so powerfully colonized, we have been so incessantly pushed to identify with collective values and beliefs and behaviors, that it's actually an effort to reclaim the reality that I am a unique, sovereign, particular soul in this world, unlike any other. And how do I language that to myself, particularly if it wasn't seen or engaged over the course of my life prior to that?
Well, I like how we have finally come around. And, we didn't plan this. We're not, this was not on our outline. There really isn't one. But to come around to individuation, but there it is. We each eventually, especially as adults, we have the resources within us to grow and develop as we each were meant to be, to find our true nature, our values, ourselves, and become that.
So if we operationalize that as we do a life review in our own minds, we will find examples where we were bullying another person. That's an opportunity to do shadow work. What was the intolerable thing that we fantasized about the other that was so dangerous to us that we had to harass it or attack it or in some way do harm to it? And now, as more mature adults, can we take that and pull it back into ourselves and find that small, hard to tolerate reality in ourselves? And if we were victims of bullying, can we look at the aggression, the accusations, the cruelty of the other, and pull that into ourselves and say, where is my aggression? Where is my accusational energy hiding? Where is my will to dominate? Where is that in me? So there's shadow work on both sides, taking hold of the disowned parts of ourselves and laying claim to it and working with it, which doesn't mean acting it out, but it means talking to it, giving it an image.
We're right back to Winnicott, engaging with it.
Yes, there you go.
We have to engage with that part of ourselves, even if as a child it was not engaged with by the adults in our lives. It's still there, waiting.
The thing that we hate in the other person, whether we think they're inferior to us or whether they're plaguing us, it's where the gold is. It's where the mystery lay.
Yes. And for the people that have been on the victim side of this great divide, same thing holds true. So where's your authentic self, your desires, your feelings, and your empowerment over yourself that you can have as an adult that you might not have been able to have as a child? But here it is. And each activates the other.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and it's internal, just as we're both saying. So here we are. The task ever present, 'tis ever thus, of individuating.
And our dreams help with that process. And before we jump into a dream, let's talk a little bit about Dream School, that Lisa and Deb and I have created a school, a learning environment where people can learn how to interpret their own dreams. Now, for those of you that may not be familiar with dream interpretation, it is a very comprehensive art. There are many facets to it. It is a kind of discipline. So in Dream School, we progressively inform and educate about the various dimensions of dream analysis. And because it is a vibrant and large community, you have a chance to work in dream groups, to attend live programming presented by the three of us, and to chew on your dreams and the dreams of other people, to practice in an environment of goodwill and curiosity. And as you gain in this way of thinking about symbolic language, you can begin to really feel when you've kind of hit the nail on the head. It's like, yes, that's what's going on in oneself, or perhaps in a loved one that you're talking with about their dream. And that can be transformative. Our dreamer is a 38-year-old male who works as a programmer. And this is the dream. I'm being forced to attend a gathering of my extended family. It's some sort of lunch or dinner, and it's taking place in my childhood home. It feels as if this is where I now live, and my father had dragged me from my room into the kitchen downstairs. The kitchen is not where it used to be. It's in a room that used to be the study. It has since been converted into the living room and merged with the kitchen in real life. My mother is there, and one other person, male, maybe my uncle. My mother says something nasty to me, further igniting my anger at forcing me to be here. I start yelling at her, pouring all my rage and fury into my shouted words. As I am yelling, I see her trying to escape my shouting, but she's cornered with her back against the kitchen cabinets. I want to hurt her the way she hurt me. I love that she is scared, and I want to wound her inner child the way she wounded me when I was a child. She has nowhere to run, and I love it, that sweet taste of vengeance. I finish my yelling at her with a sarcastic, "But no, you've never made even the tiniest mistake in your life, and everything you did was fucking perfect." Then scream in her face, letting all my rage be heard in this last word, "Liar!" I let her run away now, and suddenly I feel a wonderful sense of calm. My uncle asks me then about the time when I was out with someone. I don't really think about this question or my answer, as I'm just taking in this sudden outburst of calmness. "Yeah, I remember," I say very calmly, quietly, absent-mindedly. I mention something about coming home from that trip, to which he responds, seemingly taking some umbrage at my understatement, that I was completely wasted when I got home. Then he mentions that my friend had had petroleum, or something like that, which was the name he'd given to the no-egg, gluten-free pasta with something oily as a sauce that my friend, my real-life wife's colleague, ate. I tell him then, ready to finally focus on our conversation, that I was thinking of some other outing I went to with my brother. I sit down at the kitchen table and grab something to eat. I don't join the rest of my family in the other room. Whatever I got is so tasty, I close my eyes to enjoy it fully. My dad arrives at this point. He hadn't heard me yelling at my mother, but I knew that if he had, he'd have assumed I'd hit her and would have restrained me. I'm woken up from the dream at this point by my wife, who kisses me on the cheek. In my dream state, I think it's my mother, and I want to push her away. I want to shout at her something I can only later phrase as, "You don't get to skip the part where you apologize." But I realize in time that I was sleeping. For context, the dreamer writes, "My wife and I have had a difficult period in our marriage and are now receiving marriage counseling. I had previously gone to individual therapy and have made progress in standing up for myself. I've always had trouble with that, and representing myself, my needs, and desires. The day before the dream, my wife and I had a counseling session, and for the first time I was able to repeat the words my wife has spoken to me in anger. In my individual therapy sessions, my therapist and I were able to ascertain that I dissociated from some situations due to my childhood trauma related to my mother. Dissociated so completely, I could never remember what was said during an argument, even moments after it was over." He writes the main feelings in the dream for him were anger, rage, fury, then sudden calm and peace, enjoying the food at the table. And then he offers a bit more explanation. "My father had to once restrain me, held my hands behind my back, when I was angry at my mother. I've never been violent, and I was absolutely disgusted that he would have such a low opinion of me to think I would have hit somebody so clearly weaker than myself. In the dream, I held my arms at my sides. I wanted to torture my mother verbally. As a child and well into my teens and even adult years, I was always forced to attend parties and gatherings, although I would usually never know anybody at those gatherings but my parents. At those gatherings, but also in other areas of my life, my mother would expect very high standards of behavior, standards impossible to achieve. She once scrutinized a flawless A grade I got until she found I'd written in one of the answers a letter A, which somewhat resembled an E. Bragging then, along with my father, that she was even better at spotting mistakes than my teacher. "See, you're not perfect," they told me then. Ouch.
Yeah.
So I think this is just a wonderful dream because it contains so many elements of the dynamics that we had been talking about in the episode. this narcissistic wounding that then gives rise to this ferocious rage. And yet, the rage doesn't really solve the problem necessarily. This idea of him projecting in the dream this enormous amount of energy, and that once the tension has been exorcised and put into the image of the mother, he feels calm. It does what the psychoanalyst said, that all of a sudden, all of that feeling has disappeared. It's just no longer here.
That rings so true to, that we vent, we get the rage out of us, and it feels, good for a little while. But it will come back up again. It's not a real solution to the problem. So in this dream, I'm being forced to attend a gathering of my extended family. I'm being forced to be together with people who are my family, that our dream ego, doesn't have warm feelings toward. So we're into that coercion, domination. The bullying thing is right there at the outset. You're going to get some nice clothes on, by golly, and you're going to go, whether you want to or not. And we also, of course, have a gigantic mother complex here. Our dreamer has a lot of feelings toward in his comments, his real life mother, and here is his mother complex in the dream that is unresolved. And that part, we could call this bullying of the overcritical parent, where he says in his comments that, she once scrutinized a flawless A grade by, kind of combing through his paper until she found a very minor mistake. So something was terribly embattled here that, of course, crops up as it does for practically everybody in his marriage, of the next woman in your life, the next man in your life, the next significant other in your life is going to evoke all kinds of things from each other's early histories.
Yeah, I think that the mother comes across as perhaps part of that perfectionistic superego that's, very intense, giving the child these constant narcissistic wounds of it's wrong, it's not enough, you're not good, you're not big, you're not smart.
Mm-hmm.
And then this ferocity that comes forward, which in a sense is, see me and confirm me. He does feel this relief because now the dream mother is anxious and kind of backed up and collapsed. So there's an inflation of power. So there is a way in which we're seeing how the machinery of the psyche gets him through the day.
I'm thinking about the role of the masculine in this dream, because it's very clear about, nobody can miss the mother complex and the feeling that the dream ego has toward the representation in himself. Dear dreamer, this is now part of you. But what about the men? So scene 1 is between dream ego and mom. And scene 2, it's helpful to break up a long dream like this, is, if all this yelling and screaming at mother and getting even with her and yelling at her, if all that happens, then what happens next? My uncle asks me about the time I was out with someone. I don't really think about his question or my answer, as I'm just taking in this calmness, the relief at having disgorged his rage. Yeah, I remember, I say calmly, absent-mindedly. And so he remembers that he was completely wasted after a trip home. The uncle mentions my friend had petroleum or something like that, which was a name he gave no gluten-free pasta that his friend, my real-life wife's colleague, ate. Then he thinks of an outing he went on with his brother. And then he sits down at the table to grab something to eat, and my dad arrives at this point, who hadn't heard him yelling at his mother. So what about, we have uncle, brother, and father arrive on the scene in fairly innocuous ways, and yet they are represented in the dream. And have this sort of irrelevant conversation about the gluten-free pasta, this trip that he had been, our dream ego had been on at some point. And the meal, he says, is whatever I got is so tasty, I closed my eyes to enjoy it fully. And in his associations, he says that his father once restrained him when he was angry at his mother. So, in the context of what we've been talking about with bullies, of, what do the other adults do?
Well, it seems like in this dream, or in the historic situation, is that the dad colludes with the mother, that if the mother is critical, perfectionistic, and demeaning, and then the father is monitoring the dreamer for any aggression, any protest, or any self-protection from that, the father then pins him so that he has to align or submit to whatever the excruciating assessment is. And I think in the associations, he says that he was offended because he had never been physically aggressive towards his mother, and the father exaggerating his rage as if he needed to be, pinned or straitjacketed was again a misunderstanding of what was happening inside of the dreamer. And again, the father's response is just to wrap him up, not to talk to him, not to intervene regarding the narcissistic wounds that he's experiencing, but to just make it safer for the mother to continue to wound his self-esteem.
And that can often happen in families of first, the parental, sort of like the management team. We're the head of this little family business that we're running here called Raising You Kids. And that parents can support one another of your mother's always right. Don't talk back to your mother. How dare you do that to your mother? In the interest of preserving hierarchy, parental authority, and of course, avoiding conflict. Of let's not go there. Let's not open that terrible can of interpersonal difficulties. Your mother's always right. Now go to your room and come back down when you're ready to behave well, right? So, but in this dream, nothing much happens with the men. But I'm interested in the end of the dream. First of all, he sits down after his outburst, and this interlude with the uncle, and he says, I sit down at the kitchen table and grab something to eat. I do it. I dream ego do it. I don't join the rest of my family in the other room. Whatever I got is so tasty, I close my eyes to enjoy it fully. So when he can use his own agency to not join the family, grab what he wants to eat, he can enjoy it fully, and it's symbolic of taking something good in, of what is the psychic food that he can provide for himself or is just available on the kitchen counter, that you can have that. You can get it yourself now. And then in the dream, Dad arrives. He would have restrained him. And then I'm woken up from the dream at this point by my wife, who kisses me on the cheek. In my dream state, I think it's my mother, and I want to push her away. I want to shout at her something I can only later phrase as, "You don't get to skip the part where you apologize." But I realized in time I was sleeping. There's an echo in the dream of being given something good, the kiss on the cheek. And he says they're having a hard time in their marriage. And, so okay, they've gone to marriage counseling, and his wife is doing something spontaneous and affectionate. Hey, honey, good morning. Little peck on the cheek.
Right. And can he take that in the spirit with which it's given? Or does the complex so interfere and distort what's being given that he can't recognize it as food?
Yes, exactly. He gets real life emotional food in the form of his wife's kiss on the cheek. And he realizes in time, he makes the distinction of like, whoa, I'm not dreaming anymore. I'm awake. It's my wife. So there are some indications here of real separation from the complex, that he's not under the sway of these parental complexes anymore.
So the mother complex seems to have been internalized as an internal persecutor. And so in the dream world, rather than acting out in the outer world, he's able to face off with the mother complex and really have a rock'em sock'em with the inner persecutor and challenge rather than align with the criticisms of the internal persecutor, saying, "You are lying to me. This isn't true. I haven't failed in all these ways. I'm not making endless mistakes," as an inner figure. And then she does back up and fall silent. I mean, that's, in that regard, if we keep the symbolic attitude and we don't literalize it, as a symbolic attitude, sometimes the ego needs to stand up against some of the inner figures and say, "Cut it out. Stop it. Stop messing with me."
I often think about how, and fairy tales give us the model for this, of when you encounter difficulty, a hurdle, a problem, an antagonist in a fairy tale, you can run away, you can hide, you can do battle, you can try to befriend, you can trick, you have all this whole range of options.
Yeah.
And a psychologist named Karen Horney has minimized this and sort of distilled it down to you can go toward, you can push against, or you can hide. You can just go away. And I always like the engagement of that you can push against. But, imagine locking hands with somebody and their fingers are interlocked with yours and you're pushing. It's engagement. And moving towards something, even if it's to do battle, is also engagement. So our dream ego is engaged with the mother complex. He's just moving right in there. He's ready to do battle. And I wonder if Psyche might be intimating the movement is at two places. He helps himself to food, and it's tasty. All right, go team. And then the differentiation between the mother complex in his dream and his real world wife of, they're really a felt realization of waking up and thinking it's one, and then it's the other. That there is loving tenderness, affection. It's a sweet moment to be woken up by a kiss on your cheek.
Absolutely.
even in the midst of having marital difficulties, it's an essentially friendly gesture. So his wife comes toward him spontaneously right at the end of this dream. Now, that's amazing.
It is amazing. And it really creates this wonderful opportunity for him to really think about the difference between the mother complex and his partner, his wife in the room, and that they are different. And that's so much about pulling the complex out of a relationship where it doesn't belong. Your wife's not your mom. She didn't do the stuff that your mom did. She didn't raise you. I mean, you weren't an infant, totally vulnerable to her.
Yeah.
So when we can really compare, like this is my lived reality, this is my past, they don't line up. And we want to find those moments where it doesn't stick. So then we can, as you were saying, Deb, relax and say, no, this is a lovely kiss. This is a nice thing. I've got to wake from the nightmare. I have to wake from the dream to see reality. And that's true for all of us.
Yeah.
I want to come back just for a second at this idea of him feeding himself, that the mother complex has been banished from the kitchen, and then he needs to take on the role of mothering himself, that he needs to be the mother he's been waiting for. And that's so important because if he's projecting that onto the wife, if he's pressuring her to be the perfect mother he never had, that can create all kinds of tension in the marriage. And that needs to be extracted as well, that he can give to himself the things that he didn't get and discover that it's kind of wonderful.
Yeah. And that it's a mixed bag. Your wife, your husband, whoever it is that you're partnered with, or other people you're close to, are wonderful and good, and we have conflict, and we get mad, and the person we love is all those things. Not just, some sort of angelic presence in the room, but human. And if we've had an experience of a parent that's been overwhelmingly negative, it can be hard to come to that, what Melanie Klein calls the depressive position, that the person I'm married to is both. Not the polar opposite, not what I want her to be, but a very real person, like the mother he should have had, who was sometimes frustrating, sometimes in a bad mood, but basically really loved him. And that's where we learn to accept and love people in their essential imperfections, because we're all human. But a very one-sided negative experience of a parent has a terrible reverberation well into adulthood.
Absolutely. And in his significant context, he says that recently in the couples counseling, he was able to recall something upsetting that his wife had said to him, where normally he wouldn't be able to recall it because he's dissociating.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's just saying he could remember it. Like he could even just report the sentence because the inner defense system was so potent that previously it wouldn't even permit him to remember what had been said in the argument, and therefore you can't reflect on it. You can't process it.
He says, for the first time in counseling, I was able to repeat the words my wife had spoken to me in anger. He was simply able to repeat them. So that's a good supposition that he was able to maintain presence, and which the dream may be celebrating in his tirade against his mother complex, his mother in the dream. The dream maker may be saying, yeah, let her rip.
And that he's then able to taste the deliciousness of the food, because I have to tell you that when you're dissociated, often all your senses are blunted. Things don't smell quite real. They don't feel real. They don't taste real. So this ability to be able to let his instinctive, self-protective rage come forward, then all of a sudden his senses wake up. And that's the opposite of being dissociated.
This resonates for both of us. We hope, dear dreamer, that some of it will resonate for you. But I like this hypothesis that his ability to repeat words that his wife said in anger rather than blocking it out or dissociating has let loose this tirade of affect in the dream, of sudden new access and being able to yell at his mother, or in the dream, his mother complex, and then enjoy the food that you yourself got for yourself.
Yeah. So even though it's an intense dream, there is this arc, and as is true in every dream, if we maintain the symbolic attitude and we don't literalize it, we can make it any dream very interesting. And the dream is moving him to a place where something a little bit better, just incrementally better, is at offer. And that's the wonderful thing about dream work and dreams in themselves, that they exist even.
Right. They are of significant help to us in meeting the parts of us that help us get over childhood traumas and so on. They're useful. It's not just a theoretical thing to do. They grow us.
They do. And with that, we hope to see you all in dream school.
Thanks for listening. To submit a dream, suggest an episode topic, or join our mailing list, visit our website, thisjungianlife.com. If you enjoyed this episode, give us 5 stars and a good review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and make sure to click the notification bell to be alerted whenever we upload videos. And keep up with all things TJL by following us on Instagram, Facebook, X, and TikTok.